Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Happy to take a fairly brief call on this piece of legislation, the Private Security Personnel and Private Investigators Bill. I didn't have the opportunity to sit on the Select Committee for the entirety of the hearings on this. I was a fill-in member for some of the deliberation on the bill, and I'm happy to take up the call. Sorry, what was that? I missed that altogether. Probably wasn't worth hearing anyway. Mr Speaker, I want to acknowledge the member who spoke before me, Chester Burrows, and the way that he chairs, generally speaking, chairs the Justice and Electoral Select Committee. I think it's done on a pretty sound basis, and members from all sides get the chance to ask their questions and have their say. I'm going to pick up one or two of the points that he mentioned, however, particularly with regard to Clause 66, because Clause 66 gives private investigators the ability to use photographs, recording devices and so on without any form of control on the way they can use those devices. And Mr Burrows' argument was that providing they are registered private security investigators, that actually isn't a problem. Actually, we are giving them greater powers than the New Zealand Police currently have. The New Zealand Police don't have the powers that are being conferred on private investigators under this bill. That's something that I think we should take a moment to reflect upon, and probably one of the reasons why it would be more prudent to wait and see what the Law Commission have to say about the matter before we push it through in this particular piece of legislation. I actually was open to some of the arguments put forward in the brief period of time that I sat on the committee about why the current law needed to be changed in this area, in the sense that I, as a private individual, could go and take photographs and recordings in a way that a private investigator couldn't. And, was that right? And, they were much, much more controlled in what they could do than just an average private citizen could do. I understand, that places some constraints on them unnecessarily, but I think going the whole way and just removing any constraint on them for the way they can use cameras and recording devices is going too far in the absence of a more coherent and perhaps deeper consideration of the issues around privacy that the Law Commission is currently looking into. So I think we'd be wise maybe to slow down a little bit on that and give that some more thought. Mr Speaker, the aim of this bill is to reform the law relating to private security personnel. In particular, the bill aims to prevent certain people from either running businesses or working in various roles within the industry, and I think that's something that the Labour Party certainly supports. There are some people who shouldn't be working in the industry. Ensure that participants in the industry have at least a minimum level of appropriate training. And I think most people at home would be surprised to learn that you don't actually need any form of training at the moment to be a private investigator. I think most New Zealanders will think, yep, that's actually something that you should do, that you should be required to have. It will require industry participants to comply with appropriate rules of conduct, and I think that's something that New Zealanders would also agree with. I think it'd be fair to say, across the board, New Zealanders will generally be pretty suspicious of the idea of having lots of private investigators running around the place. I know that I certainly would be, or certainly am. However, it is a reality, it is happening, and we need to make sure that we have a law that reflects that and places some constraints around what they can and can't do. It prescribes penalties for offences against the bill and allows for the effective administration of the laws that are coming into place. This bill was introduced by the previous Labour government to ensure that suitable checks and balances were placed on the private security industry, which has been broadening its scope in recent years. The law has been largely unchanged in this area since it was passed in 1974. Obviously, there has been massive technological change since that time. Cell phones wouldn't have been in the mix, nor even probably laptop computers in the way we use them now, not digital cameras. There's been a whole lot of technology out there now that we just couldn't have even imagined it. Well, I couldn't have imagined it in 1974. I wasn't even born then. But the House, no doubt, could not have imagined it when they passed the current laws in 1974. So it's probably well past time that the laws in this area were up to date. I missed that. Oh, the moment's gone. Oh, well, I'm sure that happens to him quite a bit. Mr Speaker, the bill was prompted partly by the death in 2005 of a Blenheim gentleman when he was restrained by a bouncer. And after that tragic incident, the coroner actually recommended that the laws regarding private security personnel be reviewed and changed. So this bill has had a gestation period since 2005, and it has been reasonably slow-moving in this term of Parliament. As I said, it was introduced by the previous Labor government. It was sent to a select committee by the National government when they took office, but it's been sitting at the select committee for 11 months. And so I think it's probably high past time that this bill was put through. Coming back to clause 66, I think it's really important that this House always balance a person's right to privacy with allowing private investigators to carry out their work, which can include, of course, investigating criminal and fraud cases. And we're not sure that the bill gets that balance right. As I said before, if private investigators were going to be using digital devices such as cameras and voice recorders and so on, I think there should actually be some controls on that. I don't think they should have carte blanche to use those devices in any way they see fit, which is what this bill effectively does allow them to do. The bill, of course, does ensure that private security personnel have appropriate levels of training. It allows the licensing authority to weed out people who have serious criminal convictions, and I think that's something that I certainly am very supportive of. I think most New Zealanders at home would be very supportive of the idea that you could have a whole bunch of these private eyes running around the place who have criminal records and so on. That's not something the New Zealanders would be very keen on, and I think that's good the bill is dealing with that particular issue. And as an example of that, Mr. Speaker, it would be very inappropriate for somebody working in the private security industry with violent criminal convictions to be dealing with potentially violent situations. So I think the fact that this bill allows for them to be removed from the field, from that sector, is a very good thing. It extends the licensing requirements and introduces mandatory training for private security staff, bringing New Zealand into line with other countries, comparable countries like the UK and Australia. That's something we would support. It's estimated that around 18,000 people will be licensed under this new legislation, nearly double the number under the current Act. That's actually quite a lot of people when you think about a country of somewhere over 4 million. I can't remember the exact current figure, 4.3 or something like that. 18,000 people working in this industry, it does signify that it is quite a large one. While in government, Labor did make an effort to keep costs down for people working in the sector by only requiring relicensing every 5 years rather than every year. I think that's a very positive move. And the Justice and Electoral Select Committee has recommended that these changes to the licensing scheme be introduced sooner than planned so that they're in place for next year's Rugby World Cup. And I note the comments that the Minister made in his introductory remarks about the new date for the regime to come into force in April next year. So, Mr. Speaker, and I guess to sort of sum up, the Labor Party does support this bill. It was a bill introduced by the Labor Party, and we're voting for it. Our concern primarily rests around clause 66, around the use of electronic devices such as cameras and recording devices, which will now have no constraints and controls on them in the way they're used by the private investigating industry. We don't think that's right. We think that tilts the balance away from privacy too much. So we think that the law as it stands now did need to be updated, but we're very concerned about that this bill is going too far in that regard. On balance, however, we think that most of the changes in the bill are worthy and need to be put through, and so we'll be voting in favour of the bill. Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker.